Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to our Sunday lectures. Wonderful to see everybody here. Beautiful spring day outside, so the temptations to do all kinds of wonderful things is great. So I thank you for being here and taking the time to be with us and listen a great lecture that Marcos Diclei has prepared for us. And the theme today is the law of freedom. This is part of a larger series of lectures that we've started this month and will continue for the next month, which is all about the divine laws. Law of freedom is very important, especially in the modern society where freedom has really kind of taken a very different dimension than in previous stages of our civilization. So we're looking forward to what Marcos has put together for us. So without much ado, let's get started. I'll ask Daniel to come here to do the initial reading and the opening prayer for us. And we'll be back here at the end to talk about what's happening at the TSS, activities, and the next lecture for next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So the message is from that. This is a really great book. It's called Changing Attitudes from Francisco do Espírito Santo Neto. And the message is with yourself. It's a little bit long, but I guess it's worthwhile. Duty begins exactly at the point where the happiness or tranquility of our neighbor is threatened, and therefore terminates at the limit we would not wish to be passed in relation to ourselves. How can we spell out duty? How can we observe the inner duty imprinted on our conscience in the middle of so many social, professional, and affective duties that lead us through devious ways sometimes? You were born and raised to be unique in the world. There is no one just like you. That is a piece of truth you shall not lose track of if you want to meet your duty in life. Your basic commitment is with yourself, and your most important task on earth, for which you are the only prepared one, is to develop your individuality along the long evolution journey. Worrying about others' duties might distract you from your own responsibilities. The result is you don't accomplish your mission and don't let others accomplish theirs. And this is not about real help, which is always important, but through sneaking into people's lives, stopping them from living their own life. Taking on other people's duties destroys relationships that could be prosperous and long-lasting. Not understanding yourself well causes you to compare yourself to others, and to forget that none of us is supposed to receive the same things at the same time, for there are countless ways to live and evolve. Remember, you must only care about your way of being. So this is it. Now I invite everyone to let's close our eyes. Let's elevate our thoughts to all the good spirits that are here supporting us. Let's calm our thoughts. Let's ask for the blessings to our brother Marcos Diclei, to be enlightened, to share his ideas, so that we can absorb a little bit of the concepts of the teachings he's going to share with us, so that hopefully when we walk out from here, we can have many new learnings, and most important, apply them to ourselves. Let's thank God for the opportunity of being alive another day, and for all the love and all the blessings and good things He gives to us every day. Thank you very much, and so be it.
Good morning again.
Good morning.
Thank you all for using your free will and your freedom to be here today, especially after the cold weather we had. The weather is starting to be good, and we all chose to be here. So we really appreciate it. I also wish you all and those who are watching us through the internet much peace to you and your homes. And I feel after this initial reading, we may not even need the lecture because everything was already there. If we were able to connect and reflect on the message that Daniel read, there's so many things about freedom on that message that is so important. And we'll touch on a few of them here. We don't want to extend too much. When we study the laws, the divine laws or the laws of nature, some people may get tired, may get bored, and usually we don't spend much time. So what we are going to do, we are just going to touch on some points, and hopefully by the end of this conversation, when we go through some of the questions such as, are our destinies already defined in the spiritual realm? Do we really have a free will if the law of God governs everything in the universe? If God is in control of everything, do we really have much of a choice? Do we really have freedom? Can we say that we really have freedom? Considering that, Paul of Tarsus once said, there's not a leaf from a tree that falls without the consent of God. Some of the things we may think, can we predict the future? Can we predict what's going to happen in the future? If someone is someone committed a crime or is a criminal, does it mean that in every incarnation that person is going to repeat the same thing because the tendencies are there? So some of the questions that sometimes we ask, and I hope by the end of our conversation here, some of us may be interested to visit our studies on Thursdays. Sorry, Marcio and Raquel. Just doing an advertise. They have these studies about the gospel on Wednesdays. I encourage you all to come as well. It's a great study. Those who are on the internet, you can watch live as well and participate in our chat. But on Thursdays, I think we just entered actually the study of the divine laws on Thursdays, right, Joe? Last week. So we will go through the Spirit's book, question by question about all the divine laws. So you're all invited to come. I know Nayara is always here with us, Marco, Joe, Thiago, and a couple others. So you're always welcome to come. Before I get into the lecture, I want to give everyone a reminder. Tomorrow is April 18th, and if you remember, 159 years ago, Allan Kardec published the Spirit's book, which is considered the foundation stone of the Spiritist doctrine, considered by many the day when we celebrate Spiritism. Actually, in Brazil, there is a law now that people actually celebrate the Spiritist Day, or the Day of Spiritism. So we would like to just elevate our humble gratitude to Allan Kardec and Chico Xavier, who dedicated their lives for the Spiritism that we have and that sustain us so much. Now, I was not doing advertise on Wednesday for Marcio's course, and now I'm stealing his slide from his lecture. So this was a slide that he presented on the first week of the month, where he gave an overview of the divine laws to all of us. So last week we had Thiago with the law of worship. Today we are studying the law of freedom, and next week we'll study the law of progress with Mr. José Mussi. Welcome. And the importance for us and the challenge in studying the divine laws is that to study it, we need to deep dive into the most sacred part that we have, which is really our conscience. If you go to the Spirit's book over there, Marcio told us in his lecture, the law of God, or the divine laws, or the laws of nature, which are all the same, are written in our conscience. So if we talk about studying them, we need to deep dive, we need to go internally. Because Many of us sometimes we read the scriptures, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Spiritist book, all the Spiritist, and we don't get it. It reminds us of Jesus, right? When he said, you listen, you hear, but you don't listen. You see, but you don't understand. And so we need ears to listen and eyes to see. Because sometimes we read, but we really don't want to read. We don't want to understand. I was watching a lecture from Haroldo Dutra Dias a while ago, and he was talking about the divine laws, and he said that there is a fence between the human mind and our ability to understand the divine laws. And the fence, the barrier, is actually our imperfections. Because we are, as human nature, right? We are very selective. When we don't want to hear something, no matter how much people are talking to us, and Michelle tells me all the time at home, right? She's talking to me and I ask, what did you say? But we have a selective listening because we have our personal interests, we have our vices, we have our tendencies, we have our habits that we carry for numerous incarnations sometimes. And we get face to face with the truth, which is in our conscience, we refrain from it. Because it is there in us. That's the divine spark that we all have. Even the worst criminal in the world, there's a divine spark that will never be erased. Because it's part of who we are. Sons and daughters of God. So it's always there. The challenge is that we put it aside. We ignore completely. We neglect. And then we'll see in the law of progress, something comes up that actually make us desperately look into it and make things differently. So for us to study the divine laws together, it's an individual effort that we all need to do. I don't think this short time is enough, but it's an overview for us. So come and study with us, or borrow this Spirit's book and read about it and meditate. It requires an inner meditation. The other thing is interesting to realize is that the divine laws, do they apply only to moral principles, to the spirits, to the intelligence principle in the universe? No, they apply to everything. And again, we'll see next week with Joe. I'm not giving you an agenda, okay? But
doing my lecture.
Yeah, they apply to the physical aspects as well, right? The stars, the galaxies, everything is governed by the law of God. That's why Paul said very well, not even a leaf from a tree will fall without the consent of God, without the government or the guidance or the orchestration of God. We talked about computers a few minutes ago with Monsieur here, right? The computers have an operational system that will dictate and give instructions on how each key is going to work, how the screen will show. So it governs everything. So the divine laws are like the operational systems of the universe. And by consequence, it's part of our operational system, part of who we are. Right? But it doesn't give the blue screen of death that the Windows give. It's perfect. It doesn't crash. We are imperfect, but not the divine laws. And a word of caution. And I cannot change that because it's part of the divine laws. The more we know about it, more responsible we are. So just by the fact that you are at home listening to this lecture, after the lecture we'll be more responsible for your actions. I will be 3 times at least more responsible because I have to research and then practice a bit and deliver this. But you are also be responsible before we are all receiving that information, right? And once we know, there's no excuse to say, well, I didn't know that. We all know. Which is a good thing at the end. And the final thing before we get into it is that we can realize that the divine laws are present in our conscience, because whenever we do something good, we feel it. We know we are doing the right thing. And the opposite is also correct. When we do something wrong, we also know it. For more that we still feel good about it because of our vices, right? Our tendencies, we maybe feel good about stealing, gossiping, being violent, and doing all sorts of wrongdoings around. Deep there, we know we are doing the wrong thing. We know that. And that is the cause of imbalance for us, because when we hurt, when we hit the law of God somehow, the law of nature, we are hurting ourselves. It's like someone, a very simple example, someone who decides to lie. You create an anomaly in your mind. You have to remind your story because it's not truth anymore. Then I talk to Marco and I'm nervous that I need to remember the details that I told Jose Musi, because if the two of them talk to each other, I need to make sure it's consistent. So we start to accumulate, this mental energy which is not positive at all, and creates imbalance for us. In a very similar way, when we do something wrong, it's in our mind, that it's our own conscience telling us that we shouldn't be doing that, right? So it's a gift that we have, and for some we consider a curse sometimes, because we would like to have our free conscience to do everything you want. And doing everything you want, that's what we call freedom, which is exactly what we are going to touch today, right? What is freedom? Can someone help me? What is freedom? In different words other than do everything we want. I can do everything you want. I can say everything I want. I have the freedom of speech. I can choose anything I want. I can go wherever I want. I can go to the TSS on Sunday, or I can go to the club or somewhere else. I can think anything I want, right? So that's some concepts of our understanding of freedom. It's the absence of subjection, right? There's no one refraining us from anything. That's freedom. Or the state of not being in prison, or not being a slave. That's our understanding of freedom. I can do anything, I can think. And especially in the society where things are so quick nowadays with social media, internet, buying things through the internet, the immediatism, right? We want to do anything, anytime. And we become a very individualized society where we think about ourselves, right? At most, we may think about our families, the immediate families. And then everybody else, well, the government will take care of them. Even if they don't, it's the government's problem, because it's not mine. I'm providing for my family. And sometimes even within our families, we only provide for ourselves. That's who we are, right? Imperfect spirits, still evolving, still trying to understand what Jesus told us, right? Do unto others what you would like to do unto you. He came and teach us what love is, and we think our physical passions, the sexual attraction, we think that is love. We are still far from understanding, but we are walking. We are walking toward that. Now, the examples that we gave sounds like absolute freedom, right? And sometimes we think we have absolute freedom, especially when we are driving Toronto. Oh boy, we think we can do anything. We don't need to give signs to the right, to the left. We don't need to stop even the red light. If there's a flashing light that people are passing, they have to wait, forget about it. We think we do have absolute freedom. And that's absolute wrong, right? Restaurants, when we are hungry, right? and people are getting in line for food, or when we are usually on the Spiritist Center, that very nice potluck. Oh my goodness, it's it's a fight for food when we are hungry. So it triggers sometimes our instincts, and we want to have everything at all costs. But then Allan Kardec actually asked the spirits on the question 826, is actually on the part 3 of the Spirit's book that talks about the divine laws. Is there really an absolute freedom? What do you all think? No? The answer is exactly that. No, but there is one particular scenario that he illustrates for us in an interesting way. He said, there is only absolute freedom, and that is the one of a hermit that may live isolated in the desert. That's why the image here. There is nothing, we may think. There's no one, so I can talk, say anything I want, I can do anything I want. I don't need to take care of anyone. I don't need to be worried about hurting anyone's feelings. It's just me and dust. Obviously, that's not the case. There is life around. And for those who believe more than the materialistic concepts, we know that we are never alone, right? There's always people around in the spiritual realm. And when we think about the spiritual realm, we think something somewhere far away. No, the spiritual world is around us. It's all interconnected, right? So we may say there's an absolute freedom over there, but we just got to be careful. We'll get into this. But why the spirits use this image? And they say, because when two people are together, and Emmanuel also complements that in the book The Consoler, then we do have some duties, some responsibilities. And Emmanuel says that my freedom ends when someone else's freedom begins. So there's no absolute freedom because I need to respect someone else's freedom. So we are all connected to each other over here, and none of us have the right to deprive each other of their own freedom. Does that make sense? But do we think about it every day? We don't. That's the last thing we think. We think about our freedom, right? And usually when we study the divine laws, that's how we think. Oh, that's really nice. That applies beautifully for my husband, right? Oh, my wife should listen to this. Oh, it's a pity that my mother-in-law is not listening to this. So we think about others, but we never think about us, right? So freedom, we think about our freedom. We don't care about other people's freedom. So if we have to take one thing of this lecture today, maybe this is it. Let's always analyze if what we are doing is not hurting or affecting someone else's freedom, because there is a law of cause and effect, that if I'm doing that, there is a consequence. I will have to learn somehow that that's not the right thing to do, right? So that's the number one thing we would like to bring to us here. So my freedom, your freedom ends when the freedom of someone else's begin, right? We are responsible for our acts in the presence of the divine truth. Now, back to the hermit in the desert, right? We may say that he has absolute freedom because there's no one over there. But let's think about it. Some of us already saw the amount of work that goes behind the scenes for anyone to be born on this planet. We also know as well there's no accident. Everything in the universe has a purpose. We were created for a purpose. Life on earth has a purpose. So do we think that we would incarnate to go in the middle of the desert to enjoy absolute freedom so that I don't hurt anyone, but I live a life of idleness. Is this according to the divine law? Could that be according to the divine laws? I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not doing evil. I'm just here. Of course it's not. It can't be right. And in one of the other questions, the 770, the law of society, we are going to study ahead. Alan Kardec asks that question, right? Is there a problem with this? And the Spirit said, yes, it's double selfishness. Because I'm not doing good to me, because we are not, right? If we are in the situation, we are not helping ourselves. We are wasting our time. And we are also not helping anyone else. So just to complement the answer that the Spirit gave to Kardec, that's not right as well, because we are wasting a precious opportunity, right? So it's a figure, an illustration that we cannot take it literally. Does that make sense? Okay. So, and then let's bring this this scenario where our freedom ends, where the freedom of someone else starts. Let's bring it to our first school that we have. I know many of you went to universities and high school and first grade. What was the first school that we all had? Or have? Home. Exactly. It's not even a public school, a private school. It's our homes. That's why we live in family, right? Home is where we learn our moral principles, where we don't learn no one else as we would learn at home. That's the core. So thinking about this, when we get married, we have, and I can say that I had the wrong understanding of marriage, and we learn through challenges, right? That marriage is all about respecting someone else's freedom, respecting the difference that we have with each other. It's about learning how to resolve conflicts when we think differently, because we are different people. But we need to find a way to come together, to find what is it that brings us together, and drop the small stuff. As they say, don't sweat the small stuff. So we learn a lot about that freedom at home, in our marriages, because we have that expectations to convert the other and make him as ourselves. Like the Matrix, the sci-fi movie Matrix, when they touch each other and turn the other character into himself. I'm too nerd today, sorry. Talking too much tech here. But we want our wife to be exactly like us. We want our husband to be exactly like us. Our children want them to be exactly like us. And thank God that doesn't happen. Because it would be pretty boring if in my house everyone was like me. Right? So it doesn't work that way. But it takes a while for us to understand that. Because that's who we are. It's a bit of pride and a dose of selfishness and a pinch of impatience. Right? And 2 spoons of big ego. And that makes a mix that sometimes no marriage can stand. Right? And that's why coming back to the moral principles, coming back to the laws are so important for us. So we need to learn to respect. But then there's the other side of the equation that I also want to bring that to all of us as a reflection, as a day-to-day example. Our children. And I had a story here, but I'm not going to tell the story from Humberto de Campos, where there's a father who was very open. He didn't like religion, and he did want to give his children absolute freedom. Now let them grow and think and develop their thinking as they will. And there's some modern teachings, or child psychology. I forgot the terminology here. Didactics, right? That we need to let the children go. Well, it may work for their development, their brains. But there's a big danger when we let the children make their choices. It's like giving a car to someone who doesn't know how to drive. It's impaired driving. I'll give my car to Amanda, 6 years old. She's going to crash on the BMW out there. And I'm going to be in trouble. So I can't let her do that. So as parents, when we think about the law of freedom, we need to remember that we have our children. It's not by accident, but we committed to help in their moral education. And we are responsible to guide them, at least until they develop their reasoning, their conscience, their maturity, and they become adults. Then they are free to take their own decisions. But until they get to that point, we need to guide them. We need to give them a religion. We need to give them a moral base to know what is right, what is wrong, to understand the world and to understand themselves. Whichever religion is, as long as this religion conducts us to become better persons, right? So giving it free rein is a danger, right? And I'll post on the TSS Facebook this story, but it ended up pretty bad. Kids grew up with no moral concepts whatsoever, and they become criminals, right? And it's not necessarily happening with everyone, but we never know the tendencies that our children bring, because they are immortal spirit. They may be older than us. Who can guarantee if they didn't have any addiction, any challenges and vices in past incarnations? And we are here to help them, to observe and help them and mold them as the best of our knowledge, right? So just to put us in context that there's no one size fits all for the divine laws, right? It's situational. When we apply it to ourselves, when we apply it to our relationship with others, and sometimes with others, we need to let them make their own choices. Other times, like children, our children, we need to give them some guidance. I hope it makes sense. Now, the opposite, we just touched about it, and the Spirit's book talks about it quite a bit, is slavery, right? And I was reading the other day the Brasil, Coração do Mundo, Pátria do Evangelho, and Ismael, the spirit who is responsible for the development of Brazil in the spiritual world, was talking to Jesus, and he was very sad at the time that during the colonization there was a lot of slavery happening. And he asked Jesus, did we really need to go through such pain? Right? Was this really necessary? And Jesus said, well, no. It wasn't necessary to, have someone abdicating for their freedom. We should be talking to each other, cooperating with each other. So slavery, unfortunately, is still present in our reality nowadays. So many people working in so-called developed countries that they are earning cents, if anything, right? Or children working, unable to go to school, or even sexual exploration that we see so much. And yesterday we watched a movie called Room, of a woman who was kidnapped and he was kept by years as a sexual slave of someone. It was based on a novel, but how many times we saw those kind of stories on the TV? I saw many times, in the US at least. So it's still happening, because of our desire to satisfy our freedom in detriment of the freedoms of someone else. We don't think about others. We forget about the golden rule of Jesus. Do unto others what we would like others to do unto us. Right? And that starts at home. Right? It's very easy for us to try to leave that in the Spiritist center. It's very easy for us to try to leave that in the office. But we gotta try at home. Because God brings us together for a reason. We have things to readjust, to learn together, to help each other. Okay? So I'm not going to talk to slavery, but if there is no absolute freedom, let's talk about our relative freedom. And I wonder if this sounds familiar to anyone. Freedom, fraternity, and equality. These three. Any familiarity with anything? That's the French motto, right? I won't dare to say that in French, but this is from the posthumous work, a collection of notes from Allan Kardec. It was published after he passed away. And he was talking about freedom, right? And the principles of France. And he says that fraternity is at the base, is at the core, where we feel compelled to help each other, where we no longer look only for us. We see each other as part of a cohesive group. We see each other interconnected, as we are in the universe. We see each other brothers, and that from that derives equality, where we see each other equals with the same rights, with the rights to the same happiness, to the same freedom. There cannot be freedom without equality and fraternity. And so he makes a good reflection around this from a social perspective. And then he complements that freedom requires responsibility, which is a moral condition. And I'm going back to the analogy, right, of driving a car. Can someone who drinks constantly get behind the wheels? Shouldn't, right? We still see some people doing that. But there's no responsibility. So that person shouldn't have the right to go behind the wheels and drive a car. Right? So that's what he's saying. We need to have responsibility to manage the freedom that is granted to us. It's not only about conquering that freedom. How are we going to use that freedom? It's the question. That's how that freedom can be expanded, or maybe we may lose that. And then Emmanuel complements something that we feel contradictory. To have that relative freedom, we need to have obedience and service. Well, that doesn't sound fun or too much freedom. But that's the reality. There's no idleness in the universe, right? And once we understand those laws, obedience and service is not going to become a pain, a heavy weight in our shoulders. We'll be happy to do so. Like when we feel happy when we do something for someone, we feel happy for seeing someone happy. Now if we don't, maybe when we do something for our kids and we see them happy, we feel happy. There's something that we do that make us feel happy. That's a good hint of how we will one day start to feel happy whenever we are serving others, whenever we are obeying the law of God. So just another reflection for us about freedom here, in the relative freedom. And then you may say, well, that doesn't sound like free will if I have to obey and work. Is there really free will then? Right? And Allan Kardec made that question to the spirits. Do humans act with free will? Or we are all at the mercy of God's decisions and desires? And the Spirit says, as we have freedom of thought, as we have freedom to think, and no one can stop us to think anything, we also have freedom to act, to do anything. There are consequences, obviously, but we do have that freedom. That's called free will, as we were discussing earlier, right? If there wasn't free will, we would be like a robot or a computer who just executes tasks. Take this, put it there, take from there, put it here. We are just obeying mechanically. And if we do it right, whose merit is this? It's not ours, because we're just programmed to do that. It's whoever asked us to do that, whoever took that decision for us. And if we do something wrong, it's also not our fault. It's the fault of whoever is telling us to do certain things. So we would be like puppets. If there's no free will, we would be puppets. So what's the point? So yes, there is free will, absolutely. But again, what we do is to extrapolate that free will and mix it with our selfishness, with our pride, with our vices, and then we have a big mess. We don't have freedom anymore. We have, and I forgot the word, libertinagem, right? When we rebel and call it freedom, but we are abusing our freedom by invading the freedom of others. And that's exactly, a passage that I really enjoy reading in the book Paul and Stephen, where Paul goes to Corinth, which was, he writes to the Corinthians, not the Corinthians from Brazil, but the Corinthians are the people who live in Corinth, the city of Corinth, in Greece. And they were, they believed in gods, right? They were pagans. And they had gods for the parties, they had gods of the sex, they had gods of the food, and they would enjoy their free will to the extreme abuses. They lived for that. The gods were there to present it to them. As long as they gave their sacrifices, they were there to enjoy life. And this was the motto of Corinth. I have the right to do anything. It feels like the motto of our present days still, right? Sadly. And then Paul writes to them saying, I have the right to do anything you say, but not everything is prudent. Or let me pick his words. Not everything is beneficial. We can do certain things, but not necessarily will be good for us, right? And we can think about numerous excesses of food, excesses of sex, excesses of drugs. Drugs can cure, but also can kill, right? Excesses of care. We care so much that we don't let others to be independent. So he said that's exactly the lesson he gave to the Corinth. I have the right to do anything you say, talking to them, but not everything is beneficial. And then he repeats, I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything. He's saying he will not let himself be mastered by anything. And if we don't pay attention, we become mastered by things. What does that mean? We become addicts, right? Addicts of drugs, addicts of sex, addicts of food, addicts of resting. We become numb. All we care is resting and TV, and that's a recipe for depression. Addicts of work to get more money. And then we discarnate and we leave everything behind. And then we become desperate. I lost the time again. So that's the lesson for Paul here. Let's make sure we are not mastered by the earthly things. And that brings us back to the gospel according to Spiritism, the earthly man. That's the society that we live, where people have different habits, social habits, that sometimes we are exposed to. And it's a choice. We do have the free will to do it or not to do it. Right? Like coming to the TSS. Right? Our friends may not understand. They may invite us to parties and this and that. But if it's a priority for us, we'll be here. It's a matter of choice. We live in a society that has the current culture and beliefs, but not necessarily we need to share the same beliefs. Right? The women with the excess of care for the body, right? We need to care for the body, yes, but we don't need to have, 37 plastic surgeries and sell the house to pay for them. The guys, right? If you want to be like me, you don't need to spend money with drugs to get your muscles like this. Obviously, I'm joking. If you're watching and not seeing anything, I am joking. It's not a defect of the computer, right? So today we live in a society of immediatism and pleasures, because I want things and I want them now. There are even religions that preach that and put that in our minds, that God will give anything that we want today. Just do A, B, C, and D. Thank God the laws are perfect And many, many, many of the things we asked, we are not going to receive because we are not ready for it. It's like Livia, she asked me for the car, forget about it. You're not having the car today. Maybe a few more years coming. But, I wanted to bring that for us to illustrate. And then on the other hand, he also says to the Corinthians, again, the people from Corinth, okay, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. So do you want to find the true freedom? It's in the Spirit of God. What does that mean? That I need to see God, or I need to be with God? No, that's not what he meant. He meant that when we are respecting the law of God, the divine laws, when we are living them properly, there is freedom. Then we are free from our vices. We are free from the illusions of earth. We are free from suffering. Because we don't expect people to love us as we still do so much. It hurts so much when we are criticized, misunderstood, persecuted. But when we really incorporate the laws of God and learn what is love, unconditional love that Jesus came to teach us, then we'll be free from all this. Right? Jesus is that model, that the kind of freedom one day we will achieve. Right? The question 625 is this standard for us of perfection that one day we will achieve. And that's the level of relative freedom that one day we will achieve as well. Okay. So I'm going to skip a few things here. I want to talk about... I don't want to scare anyone with this chart. I made it pale, the background, because what I want to explain is exactly on those two lines here. Determinism, right? Determinism is the idea that everything is determined by God and governed by the laws, the divine laws. So we may think if we have this determinism in place, then there's no free will, because God is governing everything, right? And I put the chart here just to explain how things change as we mature as spirits, as we develop. If you take a look, now I can point. That's nice. So if you take a look here, you can see from an evolution standpoint, a period where we had matter, inorganic matter, and then comes the organic evolution, where the plants were created, the animals, and then human beings ourselves. From the spirit's point of view, we can see the universe immersed in the universal fluid, right? Everything in the universe is composed by the universal fluid. But in some point, the intelligent principle was introduced, creating life. From the inorganic matter, now we have life. But not the life of a spirit, a principle of intelligence that started to develop maybe with chemical reactions on plants, where they started to have some level of free will, if you may want to call it. Because at the end of the day, were reactions of hormones and light, where plants started to grow. Maybe they started to move, right? So it's a principle at the very beginning. And then you got into the animals, where there's a bit more of that free will because of the instincts, where they care for each other, they care for their babies, and they started to develop intelligence. And in some point, God created the spirit, us, right? The intelligence, where we see the sentiments and the potential for the perfection that Jesus is. So when we think about it at the very beginning, the red represents determinism. It's mainly all deterministic. The rocks, the planets, everything is governed by the laws of physics, laws that we don't even understand very much yet. But those laws are physics. The sun doesn't have free will to say, well, I'm going to get closer to Earth today. We're gone. It's there. It's the operational system. It's operating that way. There's no free will here. It's a law. The determinism is there. For the animals, it starts to come down because there's interference of the medium. There's interference of the sun, the moon. Came the animals with some level of instinct. So it started to decrease until the human beings, and we'll talk about that. If we see from the point of view of freedom, what freedom can a rock have? Not much, right? It's there and will follow whatever happens around it. But there are some laws internal to the planet that may dictate, but there's no free will. The animals, they start to have some free will with the instincts. So as you can see, the determinism starts to reduce in the intelligence. As the intelligence develops, there is free will, there is freedom, right? And the more advanced we are, the more we evolve morally speaking, not materially speaking, the more advanced morally we are, the more freedom we have, and the less the determinism take place. Because we learn what to do with the freedom that God gave us. A very simple example, the car again, right? If we are not responsible, if I'm constantly drunk, I shouldn't have been given a car to drive. I don't have the responsibility to do it. I'm going to hurt myself, I'm going to hurt others. So is God. He gives us the knowledge, the awareness, according to our progress. And we at the end are going after that knowledge. It depends on us, not depends on Him. He will give us as much as He can, but it really depends on us. Does that make sense? I didn't want to confuse anyone, but I want to make sure that we are in the driving seat of our evolution. And we are going to have more and more freedom as we become more responsible, as we obey the divine laws. Which sounds a contrasense. That's what André Luiz says in the Nosso Lar. When he was talking to someone who really failed in the planet Earth to use the freedom, she had a wrong understanding of freedom, and then he says, here in the spiritual world, we go through a readjustment of values, because over here we invert things, right? And learn that we are never really free until we learn to obey. And he said, it seems a paradoxal, but it's the perfect truth. And I hope that, we could understand a bit better what he is saying with this. Because the more we obey the laws of God, we act according to the laws of the universe, we prove that we are responsible to acquire more freedom and do the right thing. Less exposed to the determinism we become. Right? Again, the laws are perfect and we are the ones that don't follow the rules that they should be. Okay. It reminds me of the parable of the talents, right? That Jesus told us, I think in the Gospel of Matthew. He said, the more will be given to the one who has already. And he gave the talents to one, and the one buried it. He didn't want to risk losing the money, or he was lazy to work. And the one who invested multiplied the coins that the master gave them, right? In the story. So is freedom. God will give us gradually. And if we prove that we can do good with the resources that we have, we'll have more. And what are the resources? Is it coins? Well, it could be coins. It could be the money that we think is ours. Right? In one sense it is, because we earn with our work, but what do we do with it? We need to think, are we using it properly? Right? While we are throwing food away at home, there's people dying from hunger. I don't care. It's not my family. We are very wrong. We are all family. We are all connected. Right? So everything we have, our health, our bodies, right? Our intelligence, the work we have, the house we have, the family we have. That's why Tiago spoke so much about worship last week, right? Being grateful for what we have. Because it's easy for us to complain. But we have so much. And then we are on that curve, right? We are now going to advance further until we realize what we have, the freedom we have, the blessings that we have. Right? I'm going to skip a few things here. About fatalism, very quickly. This is a picture of one of the books from André Luiz as well. It's a department of reincarnatory planning, where the reincarnation of every single one of us was planned. And fatalism say, whatever needs to happen with you in life will happen. And we may say, is there freedom on that? Absolutely, there's no much freedom on that. But Allan Kardec asked the spirits, is there such thing as fatalism, right? Is that how it works? And he said, no. There is fatalism in certain things. And that's why I brought this picture. When we are to reincarnate, the kind of trials that we are going to experience, sometimes we ask for it, sometimes we are chosen for us, because we had no condition to choose. If we are going to be born among the riches, or if we are going to be born among the misery. The riches may be to test our ability to resist vanity, right? To be humble. At the same time, the poor, to make sure we don't rebel. We are humble. We appreciate what we have. We resignate our hearts. So each experience are different. We choose sometimes our bodies. The diseases that we are going to have are consequences of our physical bodies. The gender, I'm going to be born a boy or a girl. So those are the sort of things that are defined, and that's how it's going to happen. It's planned. But now the trials that we go in life, there is no fatalism on that. We may be exposed to certain difficulties and challenges, but how do we respond to that is 100% up to us. The outcomes of our trials is 100% up to us. We have the free will. We may choose to do the right thing, or we may choose to rebel and complain or do the wrong thing. I may choose to be born in a family of addicts. Oh, God put me in this family. Is it for me to fail and become addict again? No. It's for me to resist. Maybe to help the others around. But most important, for me to resist. So there's no fatalism. We make the choices, right? And then there's an example I told the other day, right? There was a medium from the TSS. I'm kidding, it's not from the TSS, but it could be. And he worked in a book printing company. And working during the day, he put his hands in the press and he lost his finger, right? And he came to the spirits meeting at night, obviously complaining that he didn't understand how God who could do such a thing. He was a good man. He was always here on Thursdays, on Wednesdays, on Sundays. And he was upset with that. And then during the mediumistic meeting, there was a message that came. And the spirits were telling him to be happy because he lost a finger. Because he actually asked to lose an arm. Because in past experiences, he used to take the slaves on his farms and put their arms in the sugarcane press. And he did that numerous times. So he asked to come and lose an arm to start readjusting with, accounts with his own conscience. But I put this phrase here about love because love changes everything. There's no Talion law anymore that says eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. If we learn our lessons, if we start to if we repent from something that we did, and if we start to amend, to correct our paths, loves will postpone some of the challenges or may give us a discount, such as this man. A very simple example, but can give us an idea that not because we see imperfections in us that we should live expecting, I'm going to have cancer, I'm going to die, I'm going to have an accident. Right? We shouldn't be asking for it. Otherwise, we will create mental creations, and these things may actually happen because our minds can create things in our bodies. And these things may happen not because it was planned, it was supposed to be, but because we create it. Very important that we make that differentiation. And then, to conclude, all this is very difficult when we go through challenges, to look at the laws and to refrain our tendencies. And we'll fail numerous times, but gradually we'll start succeeding, right? And we always remember the recommendation from Emmanuel when he reminds us of the Lord's Prayer, right? When things are difficult, when things are tough, when we start to deep dive in our innermost soul, and we see the vices that we have, the tendencies, the impatience, the selfishness, we shouldn't despair and give up. We should ask for strength, perseverance, because God is not going to do the inner transformation for us. It's individual work. Our wives cannot do it for us. We cannot do it for them. We cannot do it for our children. They cannot do it for us. It's individual work. So God is not going to come and clean us up, because then we'll take it for granted. It's a work that we all need to do individually. So when in challenge, let's remember that we are not alone. And let's be humble enough to do a sincere prayer to God, as Jesus taught us. And let's ask for help. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the right thing to do. If that wasn't the case, Jesus would not teach us to pray and ask for help. And I'll leave you with this message. Remind you of next week. We have José Mussi with the Law of Progress. And I'll thank you for your attention and for putting your free will to listen to this.
Thank you very much, Marcos. Always so inspiring. We do have we can spend a couple of minutes with anybody has comments or questions. Come on, someone's got to have to say something. Okay, so I always have to say something then. When I listen to any lecture, I try to summarize the key message. And if I understood what Marcos was trying to tell us, we often mistake freedom with the right to do whatever we want with no consequence. Right? So I have the right to go out there and protest, break some windows, and I don't want to be punished for that, because that's my right for freedom to express whatever I want. I want to be able to, drive drunk. That's my freedom. And I don't want to be punished for that. And we know from everything that we learned from the divine laws, that is never possible, because there's the law of cause and consequence. So to me, and I think that what André Luiz makes total sense. What he said makes total sense. Because to me, freedom is our right to do what we want without unjust consequences. And what does unjust means? Well, let's look the other way. What is a just consequence? A just consequence is everything that is prescribed by the divine laws. So if what we're doing with our free will is only subject to those laws, then that is our freedom from oppression in this world. If we want to pray or to have a religion, we should have the ability to do that without being arrested, without being kind of some way ostracized. And what is pure freedom then? Pure freedom is only reached when we have the kind of the conscience to only choose to do things that have good consequences. If everything we did was good, we would have total freedom. But God knows that we're so far from that. So we're still in the middle trying to figure out what are the things that we should do, and we should do them and suffer the just consequences of our act. Thank you very much. Let's give Marcos.
Thank you.
So I think our kids are slowly coming into the room. We will have our passes today. Please just settle down, quiet down, close your eyes, keep good thoughts. I say goodbye to everyone who's been watching us on the internet. Thank you so much. Your presence is always very much appreciated. Send your comments, suggestions, and I will be back after the pass with some news that you need to hear, so you want to hear. So please stay, and they will be very short. Thank you.